we're not going to make jokes. It's going to be kind of the opposite. Talking about homosexuality today. For a lot of us, it is something that you don't really know what to believe because you've heard so many different things on what to believe, on who believes what, and all the different outside opinions, and then everyone changes their Facebook profile pictures to an equal sign. You're like, oh, that's okay. I don't really know what to do with that. There's so many different viewpoints on this thing. There's so many different ways to be offended by stuff. So it's like, where should I, as a Christian, fall in the topic of homosexuality? Last week, just to recap before we move on, not last week was Easter. The week before that, we talked about homosexuality here in 11:12. I need to put this because I need to get, I updated my talk last night, but it needs to get Wi-Fi in order to update itself from my phone. So hopefully it does that. Or else, we won't have a talk first. But we'll go over what we talked about last week. I'll use my phone. My tiny, this is so small. If you guys have read Bibles, let's do that right now. Can you, Justin, can we grab Bibles?
Yeah.
Bibliothecas for everybody. That would be sweet. You guys are going to need these today because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter really what I say about homosexuality because I'd just be another voice in the crowd. But if we're going to listen to what the Creator says about it, the one who created love and sexuality and people and knows our sin more than anyone, we should probably listen to what He has to say about it. Is it good?
Yeah.
Okay. Update this stuff. Also, if you guys ever have a question, this is only for 9 a.m. Any other service, this would not be okay. But if you guys are like, I don't get that, or can you explain that more, just raise your hand and then let's talk about it, because there's few enough people in here that we can actually make it happen. So, if you guys are like, I don't get that, just let me know. Can I have a Bible also? I don't have one. Which is so not Christian. Never mind, got it.
Christian for you?
No.
Jesus is pissed at me.
Okay. You can open to the book of Matthew. Matthew, just stay there as we recap kind of what we went over last week. Okay, so last week, if you guys weren't here, or 2 weeks ago, if you guys weren't here, we talked about the difference between following Christ and being a Pharisee. So the idea of Phariseeism is that you take, Pharisees have their heart plus God's law. Okay? So this is the kind of way that I grew up. It was, I have a broken, sinful, fallen, dirty heart, right? We all do. And then the Pharisee says, I'm going to use that heart and I'm going to couple it with God's law in order to inflict pain on people. I want them to feel the full weight of God's wrath on them. It's my heart, God's law. I'm going to pair those things together and I'm going to attack people. That's called Phariseeism. Okay? That's called religion. That's not what we're about. Okay? That's not what Christ is about. Unfortunately, that is the memo that the church has been sending out to homosexual community since the dawn of the church. Okay? It was, we have our own dirty hearts, and then we use God's law that says certain things, and we say, that's why you can't be a part of our church. And there's this big chasm that's been created between the church and the homosexual community because of the way that we respond to the question, what does Jesus feel about this? Our response almost has nothing ever to do with how Jesus feels about it. It has everything to do with how we feel about it plus His laws. Okay? Jesus doesn't say the word homosexuality one time. He doesn't speak about homosexuality one time. He doesn't comment on homosexual lifestyles one time. Okay? Now, a lot of people in the homosexual community will use that to say, well, then it's right. Like, there's nothing wrong with homosexuality or homosexual practices or anything else like that. You have to understand the context of Jesus' day. This isn't a really big, hot topic issue. Okay? And just because Jesus doesn't comment on it doesn't mean that it's not part of His law. Okay? Jesus never comments on not doing crack. Okay? That doesn't mean, well, Jesus didn't say you can't do crack. And I'm not equating one to the other at all. I'm saying that it's a misnomer, saying that anything He doesn't say directly not to do in His lifetime that was recorded by guys writing about Him means that those are the only things that count. Does that make sense? Cool. See, no one other service is going to get that. Okay? I'm only talking to you guys because you're 9 a.m. That's awesome. As a church, why are we so comfortable, why are pastors typically so comfortable talking about homosexuality? I'm not. I hate talking about homosexuality because we've effed it up so bad as a church that, it's one of those, it's kind of like if there's like incest in your family tree, you're like, and they didn't exist over there. Like, that's what I want to do with this. I'm like, we suck so bad at answering this question. But the reason that Christian pastors especially tend to be so adamant about preaching this and so strong when they teach it is because for a lot of pastors, it's the only sin they don't deal with consistently. Right? It's the only thing that they can stand up and go, freaking yeah, homosexuality, yeah, that's the only thing in my life I don't do. Having a gay sexual relationship with another man, it's the only thing I don't do, so let's harp on that as much as I can. Okay? And that's why they become so comfortable with it. It was funny because in preparing for this, I got a couple different emails throughout the week that said, hey, I heard you talking on same-sex attraction this weekend, and I struggle with same-sex attraction, so I just wanted to make sure that you weren't going to say anything offensive. And I thought about it, I was like, okay, well, how do I not say anything offensive? So I worked, and I restructured, and I reworded it, and I finished it, and I felt like God was yelling at me this phrase: my word is always necessarily offensive. God's law always is necessarily offensive. Always. Every time I go to church, I get offended. Every time. Because the topic that we teach in church is sin and redemption. And there's no redemption if there's not sin. And if I can sit through a whole service and not apply anything that he said as a direct result of sin in my life, I am either in a whole other level of denial no one's ever touched on, or I'm being offended. Every time he talks about pride, I get offended. Every time anyone talks about lust, I get offended. Anyone ever talks about verbally abusing people, I get offended. About being greedy, I get offended. About idolatry, I get offended. Why? That is the Holy Spirit, that is Christ working in me saying, Christopher, you've got crap in your life you have to fix. So in him speaking that to me, I realized some of you today are going to be offended. They murdered this guy. You guys get that? They killed him. He was necessarily always offensive to people. Because his word and his truth is going to rub us the wrong way because we are sinful and broken and fallen. But it's not a get away from my church. It's a come closer to me offensive. He's breaking down the wall. He's not casting you away. He's saying we have to address this issue so you can get closer by my side. Not, I'm going to build a chasm between the two of us so you have to be farther away. He's addressing his offense is always to bring you closer. Okay, this is the reason I hate talking about this topic. Because of how poorly we've done it, you guys need to understand something. Anytime someone in the church pushes someone away from the church, the Bible basically says, you're not worthy of living anymore. Okay? You're like, Chris, that's really harsh. This is what Jesus says. Anyone who causes one of my children to fall away from me, this is what they should do. They should tie a big millstone, which is kind of like an anvil or a huge rock around their neck, and then they should get in a boat and then just tip out of the boat in the middle of the ocean. And just let it sink them to the bottom. That's Jesus' words on people who take his children away from him. People who stand at the front doors of churches and say, hey, are you sinful? You're not allowed here. And why is it that homosexuality is the only sin that we force people to change before they come to Christ? It's the only thing. Matthew 11:28 says, come to me all who are weak and heavy burdened, and I will give you rest. That verse does not say, come to me all who are perfect and free and liberated, and I will expatiate on your freedom. I will comment on how free you've made yourself. I will affirm the liberation you've experienced in your own salvation. That's not what it says. It says, you come to me with all your crap and all your dirt and all your sin, and I will give you in return rest and peace and a burden that is light. For some reason, well, you're gay? Well, fix that and then come into church. Jesus is going, read my word. Okay? Why do we love teaching on this? 1 Corinthians 6, beginning at verse 9. This is the key passage in Scripture that we are going to use as a church in order to keep out the homosexuals. Okay? Heaven forbid they come in and make us contagious with what they have. Freaking stupid Christians. Okay, sorry. Shouldn't have said stupid. But yeah, that's stupid. 1 Corinthians 6. Okay, listen to this passage. This is going to be fun. Alright? Listen to why homosexuals aren't going to heaven. Listen to this. Listen to this. It's good. Catch the big H word in this. Begin at verse 9. 1 Corinthians 6, read at verse 9. Don't you know the unjust will not inherit God's kingdom? So that's heaven, okay? The unjust will not inherit God's kingdom. So, right here, who is not going to heaven? The unjust, okay? What does just mean? You guys ever justified something in like a Word document? It says like left justify, center justify, right justify. What does it mean? It means you line up. You line it up. It says anyone who's not lined up perfectly with my word. That's called the unjust. Anyone who's not justified, just as if I'd never done it, justified, is not going to heaven. You must be justified. Okay? Right? Sorry, my homosexuals here. The unjust will not inherit God's kingdom. Do not be deceived. No sexually immoral people, idolaters, adulterers, any kind of, there it is, homosexuals. See, that's why they're not getting to heaven. No thieves or greedy people or drunkards or verbally abusive people or swindlers will inherit God's kingdom. What does 1 Corinthians 6, verse 9 through 10 say? It says homosexuals are not going to be in heaven. Right? There's a problem, isn't there? Let's walk over it. First of all, let's see who's not going to heaven, okay, in this room. How many of us are not going to heaven? Ready? Sexually immoral people. That's the first one on the list. Okay, so if you've ever had sex outside of marriage, if you've ever thought on a girl lustfully or thought on a guy lustfully, if you've ever had a fantasy or looked at any kind of pornography whatsoever, or become aroused at something that didn't belong to you outside of the confines of marriage, you're considered sexually immoral and you're not going to heaven. How many of you, just with that one thing, are not going to be in heaven? I'm out. I'm out. Cool. Idolaters. That means at any point in your life, did you ever put anything above God's place in your life? Okay? So you wake up one day and you're like, well, I should grow in this relationship with Him, but instead, I am going to sleep. Okay? So at any given point, that has taken precedence over God in your life. You have allowed something else, even momentarily, to become your focus in your life. How many of you have done that? Heaven is going to be one empty place. Any kind of homosexuals, which is what this whole passage is about, is the homosexuals. Right? No thieves. Has anyone ever stolen anything? Anyone ever downloaded pirated music, listened to pirated music, or shared any kind of videos or anything else like that from YouTube, whatever it may be, without the consent of the publisher? Anybody? Oh, crap. Well, you're not going to heaven either. Greedy people. Anybody ever put money above people or other circumstances of their life? You've pursued money in a way that should be worrisome, where it becomes conquering in your heart, where you want something you can't have. It's even to the point of coveting. You see something and you're like, I would do anything to get that. It doesn't have to be property. It can be people too. It's greed. It's I want what other people have. Anybody? Greed. Carl, how many times are you not going to heaven?
A lot.
A lot. Me too. I'm not going to heaven for a number of reasons. Drunkards. Okay? Anyone who has been skewed by any sort of chemicals whatsoever in order to transform their mind in any way. And again, I don't want to know this one just because I want it is what it is. Okay? Drunkards. Verbally abusive people. Now, this can't be us. Anyone who's ever gossiped or said something bad about somebody else, called someone a name, or just sat around a bunch of people who did and laughed along with them. Told a bad joke, anything else like that. How many of you are not going to heaven? Really, Blake? Golly. Sinner. Swindlers. How many of you know what a swindler is? It's like a cheater. Okay? You ever cheated on a test? Ever cheated on a girlfriend? On a boyfriend? Anything else to that extent? You did someone else's homework in your place, or you told someone you were going to be somewhere when you weren't, or you lied or deceived someone. It's called swindling. Anyone else not going to heaven because of that? Good. Okay, so all of us are not going to heaven for about 10 reasons. And yet, this is the verse that we're going to teach against homosexuals. Because did you see the H word in there? Homosexuals. Therefore, this week in church, we're going to learn why homosexuals aren't going to heaven. What are those other 11 things, Pastor? No, not important. Why? Because I'm guilty of all those things and I don't want to talk about them. But the homosexual thing, let's spend about an hour camped on that topic, shall we? You guys see the absurdity in this? All of these things in this group, are these nouns or are these actions? Read them. Sexually immoral people, idolaters, adulterers, any kind of homosexual, no thieves, greedy people, drunk people, verbally abusive people, or people who cheat will inherit God's kingdom. Are those nouns or are those actions? Nouns. They're nouns, okay? If you are a sexually immoral person, it's a noun. If you're an idolater, it's a noun. An adulterer is a noun, okay? It doesn't say, listen to this, it never says anyone who has committed a sexually immoral act, or anyone who has ever put God above themselves. Anyone who has ever committed adultery. Anyone who has ever stolen. Anyone who has ever been greedy. It says people who are confined, defined, and identified by the sin in their life are not going to inherit the kingdom of God.